Okay.
I'm not going to read all the long introduction. You're not reading the whole.
It's very short.
No, I mean the bio.
No need, no need. Can we take a selfie for Twitter?
I was trying to find your Twitter handler and I couldn't.
Okay, well, I'll add you guys. I'll tag you later on.
When I saw the name, I couldn't find it for some reason. Maybe because of the
Right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everybody, and thank you all so much for being here with us after our coffee break. My name is Harun Karcic. I'm the executive producer with the Al Jazeera channel based in Sarajevo in Bosnia, and I have the great pleasure of moderating this wonderful panel. I'm happy we didn't have lunch because most people fall asleep after lunch, so we just had a very light coffee break, Italian style. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine has shifted the Black Sea region from the periphery to the center of Euro-Atlantic security processes. The war has also indicated that the Black Sea region should be considered not separately, but as a part of the whole European security system. And regardless of Moscow's ultimate success or failure in its ongoing aggression against Ukraine, its strategic goals in the Black Sea region will most likely remain a very high priority for the Kremlin. This will, of course, have significant implications for the Balkans, as, of course, numerous Balkan states have their coasts with the Black Sea region, and this will have clear implications for NATO. Just to give you a very, to illustrate a picture of how the war in Ukraine has repercussions in the Balkans. This year, when on February 24th, when Russia invaded Ukraine, people in Bosnia were able to associate with the plight of Ukrainians so much so, and they were afraid that new acts of violence might appear in Bosnia. This was so serious that people began stockpiling on essential food items such as flour, sugar, and oil. And there was even a crisis. There was a food shortage for a very short period of time. People began inquiring with their local municipalities on the state of underground bunkers and shelters, which were used back 30 years ago. People were quite afraid that Milorad Dodik, emboldened by Vladimir Putin, might take steps to declare secession and that an all-out war might break out. And of course, Milorad Dodik, then a member of the country's tripartite presidency, he made it quite clear, and he said, and I quote, "We have decided to postpone our plans for secessionism because of the war in Ukraine." So he got quite a clear message, seeing to what extent and how forcefully NATO was, and the Western world as a whole was firm in supporting Kiev in its fight against Moscow's aggression. So I believe the message he was sent to him was quite clear. To help us make sense of all these repercussions that Black Sea security has on Balkan states, I'm joined by a wonderful lineup of speakers who are experts in their own fields. We will be talking about illicit trafficking and trade. We'll be talking about the EU's efforts in battling the gray zone phenomena, and we will be talking about Russian and other external actors and their malign influence operations in the Balkans. Please welcome Madalina Mokan, who is a fellow with the Aspen Institute in Bucharest. She's been doing a lot of work on illicit trafficking in Bulgaria, but also in the wider Balkan region for quite some time. Sam Fabrizi, who has been a former EU ambassador to Belgrade. And Ana Jurnic, who is a fellow with the Institute Alternativa in Montenegro, in Podgorica, a neighbor of Bosnia. Welcome to all of you, and I'm glad that we'll be hearing your insights over the next 1 hour or so. So we'll stick to the original schedule of the panel. You are invited to speak for about roughly 7 minutes, and then we will be able to have a moderated conversation, a Q&A session, and we will eventually open the floor to our esteemed guests. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First of all, good afternoon. It's wonderful to be in Rome, 1 week away after having been in Bucharest for the Aspen Institute GMF Forum, Bucharest Forum that was already mentioned as part of the many initiatives trying to make sense of our otherwise wonderful region. I would like to also say that I'm a very proud Marshall Memorial Fellow and an Aspen Romania Fellow, two organizations that are really working, thinking platforms that are working for many, many years in our region. That being said, the initial conversation was about the role of our institutions, of our states, in dealing with the many challenges that the region is facing. It is also we are also 1 or 2 days away from a very important moment for my country that again was already mentioned, which is Romania and Bulgaria being denied or being allowed to join Schengen. Schengen area. The reason for which I'm mentioning is that it is highly related to my work. As you already know, my work is in anti-trafficking, and the role of actually trafficking in persons, sometimes as a scapegoat to allow or deny regional or international perspectives of the country, something that is, I would say, extremely nuanced. But coming back to the more mainstream approach, as you already know, during the last couple of years, Romania has been not only an origin, and probably the Italian audience would be more than aware of the fact that Romania is an origin of a country for trafficking in persons, but more and more transiting and destination country for trafficking in persons. So this new role, if you like, of ours is something that I think should be taken into consideration, and also something, a new approach from which we can learn a lot from our regional partners, because in the opening remarks, we were talking about Italy assuming a more important presence at the Black Sea, but also in the wider Balkans regions. The one aspect that the few of the points that I would like to make are related actually to the very topics of this conversation that relate governance, or how is good governance important? Why is good governance important? And I would like just to say that when it comes to combating important phenomena such as trafficking in persons, what comes time and again, and I think this relates also to the broader society, what comes time and again in the stories of the survivors, but also in the stories of those working in the field, is the lack of trust in the political authority, the lack of trust in institutions, and this is something that I would dare say that we do see across the region. Strangely enough, or I would say once again, one other point that it's worth reflecting on, this does not happen necessarily everywhere, and many of the people that have been exploited, either smuggled or trafficked from or through Romania to more western, to the western part of Europe, have mentioned that for various reasons they have trusted those wearing uniforms more in that part of the world than in ours. So once again, a point that is worth reflecting on. Another point that I would like to make, because we are talking about gray areas, is that gray areas happen offline, but also they happen online. And one major point of interest, I would say, when we talk about defending human rights, is also the presence of online exploitation in various forms. So whether it is traditional, if you like, exploitation in terms of actually recruiting and grooming while using social platforms. Another aspect that it's worth mentioning is the more intricate or more complicated to follow exploitation that is happening with the help of or support of new tools such as cryptocurrency and so on. But nonetheless, despite all these, or beyond all of these, I think that one of the things that is worth thinking of is that the last couple of years have also witnessed an increased cooperation in the region, be it bilateral cooperation, and this is something that is also worth mentioning, given, for example, Italy's interest in combating human trafficking in countries like Romania, but also, obviously, European and other international mechanisms, such as the instruments for monitoring the progress that each countries do when it comes to combating trafficking and exploitation. And I'll stop here, and then I'll be happy to come back to any of the points in the Q&A session.
Right, Madalina, this was interesting that you shared with us some of your insights when it comes to human trafficking in the Eastern Balkans. I sometimes had a feeling that we tend to overlook these issues while exclusively focusing on the geopolitical aspects of the Balkans. What is interesting to note is that there was a case in 2019 when customs officials in Azerbaijan seized 970 kilograms of heroin coming from Afghanistan across Iran through Azerbaijan. It was destined to go through Georgia, across the Black Sea towards Bulgaria. And in their investigation, they found out that these smugglers had contacts in all the gray areas that we talk about. And by gray areas here, we refer to unrecognized statelets such as Nagorno-Karabakh, Ossetia, Abkhazia, Transnistria, where organized crime, corruption, arms smuggling, drug smuggling, and people trafficking thrives. And they had fixers in all these areas in Karabakh, in Ossetia, and in Russia, and in Transnistria. So it goes to show to what extent these networks, how they operate on a Euro-Asian scale. And according to a number of officials that we talked about, that I as a journalist spoke to over the last couple of years in Romania and in Bulgaria and in Greece, it seems that this heroin route from Afghanistan has been gaining pace over the last couple of months. So we see it increasing, we see traffic increasing. We'll, of course, get back to this at a later stage, but now I'd like to give the floor to Sam, who will share with us some of his insights working as the EU's ambassador to Serbia and the EU's experience and the toolkits that they use in the Balkan region in strengthening the rule of law and good governance, and also helping in a way to battle the phenomena of gray areas.
Well, thank you, Harun, and good afternoon to all of you. A special thanks to NATO Foundation, Ambassador Miudurizzo, and Professor Politi for inviting me. Yes, I've been to Serbia for four years, so in that capacity, I'm joining this panel with this distinguished colleague. So my angle would be a little bit on my experience on the ground. Before entering a specific topic, or to better focusing the specific topic of this panel, maybe a little bit a step back what has been already very good unfolded by the previous panel. The EU, if you have to look at the four actors which has been mentioned in this panel, EU, NATO, OSCE, and UN, it's fair to say that the EU has the main role in Western Balkan, is the game to play. But certainly there is a lot of work that can be done together with the NATO OSCE and UN. So the enlargement policy seems to be back on track. I think this is to be the first good news that might emerge in this day. But certainly for those who have been dealing with enlargement, the enlargement never died or never disappeared. So it was been a little bit like a car-sick flow. I was always there. So from my experience right now is to see the work has been done in the past by many people resurfacing again. To understand enlargement, we need to having in mind the two big elements. I mean, there's a political element and there's a policy element. Political seems to be back on track. There's a lot of attention, a lot of political thinking of what the enlargement entails, but also the policy work. So when you look at the paper of the EU, that might seem sometimes very difficult to read, not only because the English specific language that Brussels use, but certainly because there's a lot of substance there. Policy is a key word. So when you heard the word reform is equal to policy. In this area is one, the rule of law might be also another area, but certainly the policy work need not to be underestimated. And the policy work cannot be left alone. So there's a need for political steering as there. Why the enlargement policy? I think you even mentioned Thessaloniki Council 2003. So next year will be 20 years in Thessaloniki. So we did Slovenia and Croatia. We are really at the beginning of the way. It's 10 years that nothing very big happened. But certainly the fact that I see, there might be a lot of reasons. Some has been mentioned, the internal question within the EU, the old dilemma, deepening before enlarging. There might be also, rather than talking about sequence, you might talk about why don't you do both at the same time? Why do you reform, you enlarge? I mean, you might work on that. There's also other external factors. I'm not here to defend the EU, but I mean, the difficult decade that we had in the EU, starting with the financial crisis, migration, illegal migration, Brexit, pandemic, give a little bit the sense that enlargement cannot happen in a vacuum. So the EU cannot work in a vacuum. There's a lot of other things happening there. So what I see the situation now is the political track is back there. Certainly the Russia aggression has raised a number of bell in a number of capital, and this is good. Certainly Western Balkan come back to the fore, not just as a policy exercise, but as a political exercise. And certainly if I look at the language of the leaders in this day, more and more the expression of Western Balkan enlargement to the Western Balkan is a geostrategic investment, long-term investment to the EU. I think this is the right message to go. I mean, Europe can prosper. I think it is a fact. Prosper in a world of stability, peace and stability. The EU is a unique organization that work and prosper and develop when the world is a peace and tranquility. When the world around us doesn't work according to this, the EU suffer enormously. So basically, EU, Ambassador Norma Sionaction, what the region could be attractive for us. One of the reasons is the European Union needs stability, especially stability on its border. And peace and stability is not just enough. So we work on rule of law, good governance. We like to have an area which is prosperous as us, and I would say, the Russian aggression of Ukraine bring us the question of security, which has always been there. In the enlargement, security was there. There's a number of buzzwords, the CFSP, but certainly the security track has become predominantly back into the fore. And I think if we add this element, the policy work, we cannot think that this region can enter the EU if it's not, doesn't have the standard required to operate within the European Union. If it isn't, the region is not prosperous or at least able to work in a market economy as us, is not also a security part of the puzzle, we will run in difficulties. So I think these three elements, policy, political and geostrategical, coming back. And if I look briefly yesterday, brief today at the Tirana declaration yesterday, I think it's a good piece of work. only 33 paragraphs. Usually declaration can be much longer than that. But I see good language on accelerating the accession process, strategic orientation more than ever, gradual integration of those regions before the enlargement happen. So I think for those who knows the little bit and pieces of the nitty-gritties of the languages of the EU, you see that the scenario is a little bit shifting, and we are going towards a better narrative within the EU. And certainly, last point, 30 seconds, the gray areas. Certainly, the gray areas exist everywhere. I mean, I don't think we think that this region is a special gray area or does have a special gray area. For me, the important is if in the European Union we have in the radar this, and if you look at the declaration, you see that 9 out of 33 paragraphs are devoted to security and these, I would call, critical issues in the list. Disinformation, cyber and hybrid threat, illegal migration, counterterrorism, money laundering, et cetera, et cetera. So what is important is that it's recognized, both sides recognize, and more important is that we have the instrument to address. In that sense, my experience in Serbia, but I think in all other countries, is that those issues need to be dealt and need to be solved with a common purpose. Thank you.
Right. I mean, when you say that since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we have seen this has definitely, raised alarm bells in Brussels and Washington. We have seen, of course, increased presence and shuttle diplomacy in the case of Bosnia, Kosovo, Pristina, and over the last couple of months. When it comes to the U.S., I'm not sure to what extent they are taking this seriously. They have been sending mostly third-tier diplomats to the Balkans, people such as Matthew Palmer or Mr. Gabriel Escobar. When you compare this back to the 1990s, when Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State, was involved, this was a completely different picture. They would send far high-level diplomats to the region. But of course, we'll have a chance to talk about this in the next panel. Montenegro is a country often cited in numerous reports when it comes to foreign influences. Most of the time it's referring to the 2016 attempted coup d'etat, in which the state prosecutor of Montenegro indicted 2 members of Russia's GRU, military intelligence service, along with members of former members of Serbia's gendarmerie. And of course, another case where Montenegro is often cited is when it comes to Chinese influences and the construction of very costly highways throughout the country. Of course, this will be we'll hear more about this from Anna, who will share some of her insights with us regarding external actors in Montenegro, but also in the region as a whole. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to start by saying that regardless of all of the foreign influences which happen from time to time in Montenegro and which we do observe, the sole constant in the country is NATO membership and its EU integration process. So the country is definitely devoted to that. The former government, led by the Democratic Party of Socialists for some 30 years, but also this one and the one before it. But when it comes to all of these processes, I would like to say that at some point we would have to start thinking about how to reform the country and for its citizens, and not for any of the influences or, let's say, perspectives for cooperation and networking in that regard. We have seen bending the laws for Chinese highway loan. We have seen technical accomplishment of EU requests in regards to EU integration process. But all of these reforms, and I would like to emphasize that point strongly, that all of these processes are not truly reforming the country from the inside, that the citizens are not seeing the benefits of these reforms happening. As someone coming from the civil society, I have to emphasize that that's my perspective here today. I think that we have seen many examples of implementing so-called reforms, very technical reforms, when necessary, showing that the country can reform when we are strongly pressed against the wall to do that. But there is no true dedication to reforms in terms of continuity of the reforms itself. For example, as a civil society representative, I'm a member of the newly formed National Council for Fight Against Corruption. It was formed in summer. We were very strongly advised to apply, to join, to help, to come up with our expertise to fight corruption, because currently Montenegro does not have comprehensive strategic document to fight corruption in several areas. But that National Council was formed. We were invited there as civil society representatives, many others as well. But that council didn't have its constitutional session yet. Why I'm mentioning this example? Because for many years we have been seeing that the country is ready to do some technical improvements when forced by the European Union, but without follow-up, which could truly implement reforms. NATO membership, I think, is also a good example, because we have been reforming our security sector in order to join NATO, but we have seen backsliding in terms of transparency, in terms of openness, in terms of truly implementation of the reforms. For example, my professional love of my life are public procurement, and we have this huge part of public procurement spending called confidential procurement, for which we don't even know how much money is being spent. That part of the public spending is completely untransparent. We have national security agencies reports which were open to public to some extent during negotiations with NATO, but now they are not anymore. So we have seen this backsliding in terms of integrity of the country, as mentioned also in the agenda for this panel, which is why I would like to say that we should start seeing us as the country, as the countries in the Western Balkans, we should start seeing all of these processes and integration processes as a mean and not a goal, in order to implement reforms for the sake of the citizens, of the taxpayers, and then the integration will come as a reward. It will come as the final result. But for many years, it has been otherwise. Montenegro, for example, among the Western Balkan countries, has been named the front runner in the EU integration process, and we truly are in regards to technical implementation of reforms, and we called it checking the boxes in terms of adopt this law, form this council, do this reform, form this body. We have several new institutions, including Special Prosecutor's Office, which we mentioned in terms of coup d'etat example. That was a requirement of the European Union, but we are now facing a serious lack of results in terms of their work. We have anti-corruption agency, which was also one of the requirements of the EU negotiation process, which is seriously lacking results in fighting corruption. They call themselves purely preventive body, which is not doing anything. It's not preventing, it's not educating, it's not they're in charge of, for example, access declaration of public officials, whistleblower protection. They didn't protect any whistleblower in the country. So these are reforms that I'm talking about in terms of not achieving results, but only ticking boxes. At some point, our organization and several others said publicly that both to the state, to the government, but also to the European Commission, that the country is simulating reforms. And we should come to an end with that, I believe. So I would like to finish maybe with these 2 points. One is to see all of these processes and all of these integration processes as a mean to reform our countries. We have a huge help, we have a huge funds, we have a huge technical support, expert support, every mean we want to implement true reforms, and we're not using it for reforms and policies, as you said, because I agree that it's the same when we hear reform, 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 and policy, policy, policy. And also to continue monitor these reforms even after the country joins, for example, NATO, but also later on when our country joins the European Union. In terms of, just to finish with this crisis caused by a Russian invasion to Ukraine, It couldn't be the worst situation, the worst moment for Montenegro to deal with this crisis, because we have a huge political instability in the country, which was caused by the change of the ruling majority in the country after 30 years. So we are now in the transitional period, which is very difficult. It's not easy at all. But we are struggling and managing. But now, at this point, these daily politics, let's say, are something that occupies public space in Montenegro, and it's very difficult to impose public policies and put them on the agenda, including EU integration process, but also our internal reform processes. Sorry for using a little bit time then.
You know, what is interesting is that even people in Bosnia that I often speak to in other parts of the Balkans, that in countries which have not yet joined the EU or NATO, they think that once they join either of these two alliances, all their problems will end overnight. And of course, from what we hear from you and what we know is that this is just the beginning. It's a very long and painstaking process. It will take, it needs constant reforms and, you know, goal settings. That is something that needs to be followed up all the time. And of course, malign foreign factors will not give up on countries that have joined NATO. Montenegro is the best example. And of course, Mr. Solomon mentioned today how there have been numerous disinformation campaigns by Russia inside Bulgaria, which is a NATO and EU member state. So Moscow doesn't stop there. It goes on pushing until it reaches its goal, or at least tries to create yet another Trojan horse within NATO or the EU, comparable to Hungary. Now we have roughly 15 minutes to go through a number of questions which I've prepared for you. Later we'll open the floor to the audience. So I would like to start with Madalina and to stick to your area of expertise. You know, we talked about gray zones, unrecognized statelets where corruption, arms smuggling, illicit trade, and human trafficking thrive. How do these gray areas become a security challenge for the EU and NATO? And what international instruments can Romania, in this case, use to try and, you know, battle these forms of illicit trade and human trafficking? And how difficult is it really to indict individuals?
Well, according to international instruments, we are not that good at indicting, but nor are the countries in the region. The two main monitoring reports, the Greta report, the Council of Europe report, and then the Trafficking in Persons report of the State Department, do not show necessarily that actually any of the countries in the region have improved significantly. But it is worth mentioning, though, that, you know, as they say, the problem with statistics, and I'm not going to quote from The Wire, but the problem with statistics is that once you start counting, the numbers keep up showing up. And it is, to some extent, it relates to your earlier comment about the existing of the trafficking networks. If you really look for them, then you will find them. And maybe if you don't look, you show better in the statistics. Coming back to the question of actually preparing and, you know, being able to support in court cases on trafficking, it's also worth mentioning the difference in legislation in various countries around the European Union. And the reason for which I'm making this comment is that actually the existence of common understanding of what is a perpetrator and what is a victim would be one of the cases that would probably help us restore not only rule of law in the larger understanding of justice being served, but also the very essence of, of human dignity. So common understanding and, a better, I would say, legislation, but also better statistics, making sure that we count the same things. And one other important thing that I would like to emphasize once again, joint investigation teams have proven to be successful throughout the years in actually taking down transnational networks. And this is one of the reasons for which, once again, I think that the more united we are as a union, the more integrated we are as a union, the better our chances to actually fight these illegal networks, be it of human smuggling, human trafficking, or other types of trafficking.
All right, Sam, I mean, I'm going back to Serbia again because you spent time living there. Just a couple of days ago, President Aleksandar Vučić named Aleksandar Vulin the head of his intelligence, of Serbia's intelligence agency. And of course, Aleksandar Vulin is a very prominent pro-Russian politician who has a close working relationship with Nikolai Patrushev, who is, of course, a close aide of Putin from the Siloviki clan and a member of an advisor in his National Security Council. The EU has been working with Serbia for many, many years, investing a lot of money in good governance, in education, in promoting independent judiciary. And then again, in Serbia, 2 years ago, the government installed this so-called smart city system operated by Huawei, a company with close links to the Chinese government, having hundreds of, if not 1,000, I believe, cameras throughout Belgrade. 2 weeks ago, they installed a software, a facial recognition software. Of course, civil rights activists have denounced these moves. What went wrong? I mean, the EU has invested so much, has been working with the government of Serbia for a very long time. Why is the country backsliding in a way? Why? I mean, you have a country now which has very close links with Moscow, which has regular military exercises with Belarus and with Russia, and with China and with the UAE.
Well, it's an interesting question. Let me reply in this way. So, the question of Mr. Vulin, I mean, I cannot comment on the current government, but I can say that during my time, Mr. Vulin was Minister of Defense and Interior, so he's a long player in the Serbian coalition. You mentioned the case of Huawei and the technological element of there. I mean, from the European Union and I remember I dealt with this case when I was. So for those who haven't followed this, basically is the camera that you use at the crossroad, and usually done for security and traffic monitoring. And at that time, rightly so, some of especially the NGOs made a point that we found relevant. So for the EU at that time, was not the question of using that kind of technology, which is basically in the sovereignty of the country to use the technology. But for us, what is important was the legislation and the legislative framework connected to this. So is the privacy law in place in Serbia? Is the enforcement of the privacy law respecting the EU standards? So this is the angle where the EU come. So it's easy to politicize the questions and why you use Huawei rather than using, I don't know, another company. But for us, the question is, do you have the right legislative framework? And if I can open a parenthesis on the reform, which was mentioned before, the reform is not, the reform you might see from at 3 different points, the reform to make the accession, of course. First, the reform are good in their self. So basically, you reform for a better governance, better prosperity, better democracy, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, the EU push as a positive element. As a transactional element, because the EU, you reach basically the best benchmark to get into the EU. The third, also because the reform are always needed, is an ongoing process. The EU is evolving. The body of legislation that the EU has made only on environment in the past 10 years is an enormous body of work. So you need to reform the system to keep up with what the EU is going. So in that sense, the reform should not be seen as a constraint, but I think as a 3 element. If I may, closing, I had a fantastic US ambassador colleague in Serbia. I wouldn't call them third rate. I never called a third rate any US ambassador there. There's the old generation now, Christopher Hill, and there's a new generation, Escobar and others, who know the region, speak the language, and know the issues. So nothing that the good relation I had with my US counterpart.
Right. Anna, over the past decade or so, there's been an increase in the flow of capital from non-democratic countries into emerging democracies. And of course, as you said, Montenegro is a case example. This has often been referred to as corrosive capital in a way. From your perspective, how does it undermine democracy and Western efforts in the case of Montenegro?
Well, I must be honest that it's not really my field of expertise in regards to corrosive, but I would definitely say that it does affect democratic processes, of course, and we didn't build. Montenegro is a country which is negotiating for 10 years now with the European Union and for the EU membership. As I said, we built many institutions, we strengthened many institutions, but only in paper. And when it comes to institutions who should stop these practices, who should process these practices, and who should protect the country from such cases, I think that your data clearly shows that we don't have them. When it comes to democracy and building democracy, it's I wonder sometimes what are the priorities in the country in order to be democratic and in order to be a strong country which is protected by all of these influences. And when it comes to, for example, let's say internal behavior in the country, the government from time to time, when it suits them, instead of forbidding it, instead of protecting the country from it, it's also encouraging and allowing such behavior. For example, as I already mentioned, highway, we in general have a very bad practice in planning and implementing capital investments and capital projects in Montenegro. But for this specific project, we had a Chinese company, Chinese law, building the highway. So that's this part of the project. But in order to do that, we also had to change some side roads, improve them, build new ones, etc. And that was done by domestic companies. Domestic companies played by the same rules as Chinese companies, not paying taxes, not implementing public procurement law, not reporting on what they're doing, not being held accountable for any deadline skipped or quality of work implemented, etc., etc. So the country, from time to time, instead of protecting their budget, their money, the taxpayers' money, in order to achieve results which would help the citizens have a better lives, close a blind eye on such practices and don't investigate, don't prosecute, don't...
But not only Montenegro, we remember the case of Croatia and the Pelješac Bridge, which was funded by the EU, built by a Chinese company, costed about 750 million euros. But let me ask you and Sam a question. We've talked about EU's integration policies, and this has been rather slow. Now we have a plethora of foreign actors in the region: China, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, of course Russia, and more recently Israel has been establishing intelligence and security links with Greece and Romania and Northern Macedonia. If you look from today's perspective, if you zoom out, why have the Baltics been far more successful in transitioning from communism to democracy, and the Balkans are still where they are? Of course, we don't understand, bearing in mind the wars in Bosnia, Kosovo, and in 2001 in Macedonia. Why have other countries been pretty much stuck there where they are? Why didn't we have as much success as the Baltics? Sam?
I go first. Well, no, it's a good question. I guess it's...
They literally joined 10, 12 years after getting independence from the USSR.
I think there is the political environment was different. So basically, the 90s brought, I would say, a new vision for Europe. That you found also at the end of the I think before was mentioned Romano Prodi, who was president of the Commission at the time. So basically, the still.
So there was more momentum.
Yeah, the momentum certainly was there. The solution of Yugoslavia was a cruent one, so basically left into the system scare and division and difficulties they didn't have. And as I said before, also if you compare the life, I always have to remember the 2000, I think, 3, first strategic policy paper by Xavier Solana. I think the first word is we have never been such a peace, such a prosperity in the EU. Was the golden decade. We made, the Soviet Union collapsed. We were not talking about end of history. We were talking about beginning of the history for our continent. We said we have reunited the continent. And after we have very, very, this, I would say, I wouldn't call it, but this momentum, as you said, lasted through the beginning of this century. But the hard reality came with the financial crisis, where I was in Brussels those terrible 3 years. Basically, really here that we really risk to seeing the EU imploding through an external shock, Wall Street to Europe, debt crisis, Eurozone. So from that decade has been a very tough one. There's been a crisis basically every couple of years. External crisis, always I like to say. Migration, illegal migration was not generated by the EU. Brexit was not generated by EU itself. Pandemics and right now the Russian aggression. You might talk about also Crimea 2014, but certainly this has created the political momentum has totally been different. And I would say despite this, Croatia joined 2013, and in July, we haven't mentioned, but in July, last July, finally the EU launched negotiation with long-awaited with North Macedonia and Albania. And yesterday, for the first time ever, when I see I think was said before, when I see the leaders of the EU in Tirana with the 6, I think is an important sign that we don't have to underestimate.
Anna, your thoughts?
One of the main reasons I would say is that political leadership didn't change almost at all in our countries. I think that plays a huge role in everything else. They're stuck to old practices, very difficult to leave them. We can see, for example, then that due to all of these reforms, for example, we have, at least in Montenegro, enormous and huge important results in fighting organized crime in terms of cooperating with Interpol and other Europol, etc., which proves that we can deliver some results and that we can, but when the institutions should turn against those who are leading the country and those who are sitting in the parliament, in the government, in the presidency, then these reforms go a little bit slower and usually fail in terms of results. Maybe that would be the main reason to answer your question shortly. But as I was saying about thinking about all of these reform processes and the EU integration process itself as a goal, as a mean and not a goal, I started thinking that in order to do that, we would require a new or change some visionary political leadership to do that so, because as for 10 years, as long as Montenegro is negotiating, many times we have heard that EU integration is the goal. That's our goal, that's our main goal. We have even some strategic documents which the citizens should benefit from, not consulted with the citizens, but consulted with the EU experts. We have some of those like Public Finance Management Reform Program. We have that document only in English, for example, and the citizens don't have a Montenegrin version to be consulted on. We have experts in the working group, but not domestic knowledge represented by academics, civil society, media representatives, etc. So it's a very revolutionary thinking, I would say, and very difficult to implement and to change after 10 years. But I do truly see it as a good opportunity to try with. Because as long as our leaders are only seeing EU integration process, but all of the other processes as an umbrella which is protecting them from truly reforming, and not an umbrella under which they have all the support to truly reform, then we will not move forward. Because I think Montenegro has now fully accomplished requirements at the technical level. We have better and better grades, and even in this latest European Commission's report, European Commission has stated many accomplishments, including results in organized crime fight and some other, but clearly stated that political instability will not make the country benefit from the EU integration process, and that we will not go further in that process unless we have stability, political stability and political will in the country to pick up with the reforms and
Madalina, would you
make
like
progress.
to add in before we open the floor to the public?
No.
Perhaps with a
Not necessarily, except my personal comment that I hope we never get, as citizens, we never get content with our political leaders, and we always challenge them in order to get better societies.
But for Romania, it has been quite a challenge. Having joined the EU and NATO for many, many years, you're still battling quite a lot of deep-rooted corruption and organized crime, and not only Romania, but Bulgaria as well. How challenging has this been for you as a civil society activist?
I mean, to live is to resist. I don't want to be too Gramscian about it, but to comment on the instruments that the European Union is trying to implement, I think that, again, the more united we are in having these instruments equally applied to all, the better off we will be as, again, as a union of, if you like, of values. As I said before, I think that our participation in the great debates, because the ambassador was mentioning the fact that it's not only us meeting some standards already existing, but also each of our societies participating in the great debates that the union itself is trying to tackle. One of them, just to quote my field, is the one, the up and coming debate on the limits of privacy and the capacity of the law enforcement to actually regulate or intervene in private conversations that are taking place on different platforms, on different online platforms. Who should be the one that should enforce and regulate these areas that are, I'm not sure if they are gray, but very often they are extremely dark.
Right.
So these are one of the this is one example of the debate that I think all of us should be part of, but whether we are, new members, old members, accessing countries.
Waiting.
Ours, again, is something, I mean, it's one of the big conversation, actually, of the humanity.
Right. We do have time for to open the floor to our esteemed guests and members of the audience. Yes, sir. We have 3, 4 questions. All right, we'll go first.
Thank you very much. I wanted just to follow up Mrs. Mokan's observations, because sometimes, you see that there are a number of governments and countries that have a nice democratic graphic interface, but their operational system is still Stalinist. And, I think it is important to understand it. And it goes well beyond the Western Balkan area. There is a long list of situations that are absolutely unsatisfactory, but the appearance is nice, as in good old Soviet times, comrade, it's good. No, it's not. And I think it is important that we take in, really a close look at that. Otherwise, we will see more and more democratic backsliding. And here I come to the question. To whomever in the panel would like to answer. What do you think is the relationship between influence of organized crime and democratic backsliding? As an Italian, you see, I'm very open to your answers. Thank you.
Right, this is a question for you. Or should we take a few more questions before we answer? There was a lady at the back who wanted to ask, yeah?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amina Zeljkovic. I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina, born and raised in Sarajevo, doing my master's studies here in Rome. I have a question that relates to internal and domestic affairs that actually lead to the problem in accessing the EU, in Bosnia and Herzegovina specifically. Just to give a short background, for example, NATO, when you drive through Sarajevo from Federation to Republic of Srpska part, you have completely different posters in the city where in one part it says, let's join NATO, and the other one says, say no to NATO. So my question is addressed to you mostly, Sir Fabrizi, but I also know that Montenegro has a lot of internal issues, especially now with President Đukanović out of power after 30 years. How are these internal issues affecting and how are they making us slower in the process of this kind of a battlefield between big powers fighting in this region? What can we do inside the countries? What is to be made by our political leaders? How can we sit at one table and make decisions that are going to make this integration in EU part more effective and faster? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right.
Well, I want to leave unanswered the question by Professor Politi. But, well, the relation is easy. And it's organized is bad for democracy. It's bad for a number of other things, but certainly it's bad for democracy in terms of by influence, alter transparency. You might mention public procurement rather than others, but certainly, and this is the fact. So if it was the easy question, this is the easy answer. In terms of what the EU could do in this, also because we always try not to be seen as an invader or someone imposing something that doesn't exist. What we said is, if you want to work with us, if you want to be part of the family, because we might remember the enlargement is something that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It's not a treaty, it's not a pact, it's not a memorandum, it's family. So how we can work together, the level of trust should be maximum, and the level of convergence on the way we operate should be maximum. And I made an example on migration there. Basically, it's the Balkan route is quite a known area. But certainly we have developed a number of ways to work on migration with the Balkan 6. I know best, of course, Serbia. Before arriving, basically the control of the border, the southern border of Serbia, was left totally in the Serbian hand, as it should be. And certainly we said, well, we have the Frontex, which is an agency based in Warsaw that deal with the management of borders, especially for the migration side. Why don't we work together? It took 3 years and a half. By the end, we signed a treaty between Serbia and Frontex as Frontex with the other countries. And basically right now, I think in January 2023, you will have Frontex official, so which is European official, working with the Serbian official on the border, external border of Serbia, checking among other things the illegal migration. So this is what I want to say. Organized crime is bad. Question is how we can help to reduce the level of the bad influence, and can we put in place instrument? So if I still have to reply to the question, if I understood how the internal EU reasoning impact on how we read. But, well, I mean, we don't have to do the whose fault is this, because certainly European Union has been for a long time, a culprit of a number of problems. Europe has its problem, but the region has its problem as well. So the question is that An easy way would be help us to help you. So in the sense that we haven't spoken today, but basically the EU is committing 14 billion euro, 14 billion euro over the 7 years in the Balkan area. So it means that we put the money where the mouth is, and those money help to do reform. It's not easy to do reform. I think it's because the standard of the EU reforms, I would say, one of the best in the world from a technical point of view. But you need to have buy-in, it was mentioned before. You need to have people in the leadership, business, media, think tank, normal people believing what you have to do. It's not an easy exercise. So that said, you need to have, I've always called about a sort of convergence of all, is a nation mission. If you are convinced what you do, you will take also the pain of some difficult reform. If you do half-baked reform, or if you don't send the message that this is good for the country, you have imperfect reform. Brussels, I would say the bureaucracy in Brussels, and I say bureaucracy with the capital B, good bureaucracy, make photo. The report of the Commission made every year is a photo with a very, very detailed pixel. Is there. You can see everything there. And after this, the political momentum, member state, the parliament, sovereign, to make the decision. What I saw, and I come back to what I said at the beginning, the political momentum I see now is shifting more towards a real understanding that enlargement is needed rather than not. Sorry for the long reply.
Right, and did you want to...
Yeah, just a bit briefly, for me the connection is, follow the money, being as good of a business as it is, for example, human trafficking. I think that the capacity of not only national but also transnational entities to identify and further on with the support of the law to seize the wealth that is coming from such activity is absolutely fundamental. If we do not manage to identify assets that were made from actually exploiting people, and if we do not give the society the belief that these things can be stopped and people can be brought to justice, and there, moreover than them serving time in prison, the money made are, and the assets are being recovered, if you like, by the society, then I would say that this would contribute to our societies being more and more vulnerable. This would give me, and this is one short thought, this is a bit more complicated in societies that are experiencing post-communist realities. The reason for which I'm saying that is that our relation with private property is not only existential but also constitutional. So who is able, how we can prove that someone owns the right to having under their names a specific problem is a very complicated question. But the trend of, having to prove legally that you earn that money, again, in a legal way, and then if you are not so, they might be seized, is something that we might want to look at. It's been already happening in other parts of Europe. Other former members of the European Union are doing it. And, again, how we manage to stop the incredible wealth that is made will help us stop the backsliding.
Right. Madalena, Sam, Anna, it was a pleasure hearing your thoughts and insights, and thank you all to members of the we do have one more question, because we still have about 2 minutes for that before we draw this to a close.
Thank you so much. Actually, mine is not a question, it's a comment. I'm from Embassy of Armenia, Kristina Mehrabekyan. And I would like to comment on the remark by the respectful chair here. Nagorno-Karabakh has been used here in the list first of gray zones. And moreover, with so many evils that I don't want even to repeat, not to mislead the distinguished audience even more. This is, I would say that it is not reliable, false information, absolutely. The reality is that for almost 30 years, Nagorno-Karabakh has been not de facto independent, not de jure, but de facto independent state with all the attributes of statehood. With democratically elected government, with democratically working institutions. During all the elections, they had international observers, and all of them testified that the level of democracy was even higher than in Azerbaijan itself. So when you are using here this unverified information, it misleads the international community. It doesn't make justice to the realities on the ground. It doesn't make justice to the people of Nagorno-Karabakh that are fighting for their self-determination for almost 30 years and who are under existential threat now. And please, you cannot bring any reliable and trustful source of information. The only source would be Azerbaijani information. And I would call on you to refrain from doing such statements because it does not contribute to reliable journalism. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much for your comment. We should be ending now. We have a coffee break starting very soon. So thank you all once again for your patience and for being very kind listeners. All right,
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Good, yeah? You happy?
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Same, pleasure once again. Thank you so much. Ana, hvala puno još jedan put. Ajde, nije loše.
Odgovorim ovoj curi gore, ali nema veze.
Na kraju niko njoj nije odgovorio, ja mislim za nje.
Ne, ja sam htjela baš.
Ja sam shvatio.
Crnu Goru, ali nešto si me...
Što je nešto